Photograph number 4 from the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition Archive shows a building known as the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Hall, the largest building on the fairground, and at the time, the largest enclosed structure on Earth. The photograph was taken from the south, sometime in the winter of 1891, during what the official record calls the early construction phase. In the foreground, men in heavy coats stand beside wooden-handled tools. Behind them, the base of the building is visible. And what you are looking at, if you look carefully enough, is not a foundation being built. The earth around the base of that structure has been displaced outward. The ground level at the building's perimeter is lower than the ground level 20 feet back from the wall. The walls themselves do not taper as new masonry does. They are uniform from top to what is visible, finished, not rising. A retired civil engineer named Marcus Duffield, who spent 4 years in the late 1970s compiling a private photographic study of the 1893 fairground construction record, wrote in a self-published 1981 monograph. In 41 years of reading construction site photography, I have never seen a site that looks like this one. These photographs do not document assembly. They document uncovering. Duffield mailed copies of his monograph to 7 university architecture departments in 1982. 5 did not respond. 1 responded with a form letter. 1 responded by return post with a single handwritten line. Please do not send further correspondence of this nature. Duffield died in 1989. His monograph exists in 3 known copies, 1 in a private collection in Oak Park, Illinois, 1 in the possession of his son, and 1 that was donated to the Chicago History Museum's Special Collections in 1991 and cataloged under an acquisition number that does not appear in the museum's publicly searchable database. The official history of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition tells us that the so-called White City, 14 monumental neoclassical buildings covering 690 acres on the south side of Chicago, was designed, engineered, and constructed from bare lakefront marshland between 1891 and 1893. 27 months, 14 buildings, each of them clad in a material called staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and jute fiber, which gave them their uniform white appearance. Each of them featuring Roman columns, coffered ceilings, arched doorways, and decorative detail of a quality and consistency that, according to the official account, was achieved by a workforce of unskilled laborers, many of them recent immigrants, working under the direction of architects who had never collaborated before and who had only a single season to align their designs. That is the story. But here is what those same official records never explain. Not one of the 14 primary buildings from the 1893 fair survived. Not from fire, not from flood, not from war. Within 8 years of the fair's closing, 13 of the 14 structures had been demolished, burned, or otherwise removed. A destruction so thorough and so rapid that architectural historians have been quietly puzzled by it ever since. The buildings were described by contemporary observers as among the finest public structures on Earth. 3 separate European delegations visited with the stated purpose of studying their construction methods for application at home. And yet, within a decade, they were gone. Every one of them. The one remaining, the Palace of Fine Arts, now the Museum of Science and Industry, required a full concrete reconstruction of its interior in the 1920s because, as the Chicago Park District recorded in its own internal report, the original substructure was found to be of a type inconsistent with construction dating to 1891. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as compelling as I do, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm consistently suppresses this kind of research unless you signal it directly. Now, back to these 10 photographs, because once you see what they actually show, you will not be able to look at the standard history of the 1893 fair the same way again. To understand what these photographs document, we have to go back, not just to 1891, not just to the Gilded Age. We have to go back to a fundamental question that the official history of the Chicago Fair has never once answered honestly. How do you build 14 monumental buildings in 27 months on a swampy lakeshore? With no powered machinery beyond basic steam hoisting equipment, using a workforce that had no prior experience with neoclassical architecture at this scale, and produce a result of such precision and uniformity that professional architects from 12 countries came to study it as a technical achievement? The answer, according to every standard textbook and every exhibition catalog produced since 1893, is American ingenuity and organizational genius. Director of Works Daniel Burnham is credited with orchestrating it all. The architects McKim, Mead, and White, Adler and Sullivan, Peabody and Stearns, are credited with designing it in a matter of months. The laborers, never named, are credited with building it in the time remaining. There is also the matter of the workforce itself. The standard account credits a peak labor force of approximately 14,000 men working the Jackson Park site simultaneously. For context, the construction of the United States Capitol building, a project of comparable structural complexity, though considerably smaller total floor area, employed a sustained workforce over a 20-year period. The Eiffel Tower, completed in 1889 and widely considered the engineering marvel of its decade, required 300 on-site workers and 2 years of preparation before a single rivet was set. The 1893 fair's 14 buildings, comprising a total enclosed floor area of roughly 30 million square feet, were reportedly finished in 27 months. No engineering journal of the period attempted a detailed accounting of how this was achieved. No labor historian has produced a satisfactory analysis of how that workforce was coordinated. Daniel Burnham's own construction diaries, which are held at the Art Institute of Chicago, contain a notable gap. The period from January 1891 through September 1891, the first 9 months of site work, is represented by fewer than 40 pages of daily entries, most of them concerning personnel disputes and supply contracts rather than structural progress. But there is a body of photographic evidence that has sat in the archives of the Chicago History Museum, the Library of Congress, and the Smithsonian Institution for more than a century, largely unexamined as a unified sequence. And when you examine it as a sequence, not as individual images of a busy construction site scattered across a dozen books and exhibition catalogs, but as a chronological record of what was actually happening on the ground day by day, a different picture emerges entirely. Here are 10 of those photographs and what they specifically show. Photograph 1 is dated February 1891 in the official caption. It shows the western edge of what would become the Transportation Building, designed by Adler and Sullivan. The ground around the building's western wall is lower by an estimated 4 to 6 feet than the terrain line visible in the background. The wall itself, and this is the detail that matters, shows no scaffolding marks, no formwork impressions, no visible joint lines between courses of fresh masonry. The surface is continuous. It does not look like a wall being built, and it looks like a wall being revealed. Photograph 2 shows the electricity building from the northeast, dated in the archive as October 1891. In the lower left corner of the frame, a crew of men is operating what appears to be a horse-drawn scraper, a grading tool used for moving large volumes of earth. They are moving earth away from the building's base, not toward it. The standard caption describes this as site preparation. But site preparation and construction moves earth toward a foundation to backfill and support it. What is visible in this photograph is earth being moved in the opposite direction. Photograph 3 is one of the most studied images in the fair's archive for reasons unrelated to this analysis. It appeared in several contemporary newspapers. It shows the administration building, the central dome structure designed by Richard Morris Hunt, with a group of officials gathered in front of it. What none of the publications that have used this image have ever noted is what is visible on the left side of the frame. A wall section, clearly part of the administration building's south wing, is surrounded by a depression in the ground of approximately 8 feet. Workers at the bottom of that depression are working with hand tools. They are not adding material to the wall. They are removing material from around it. Photograph 4, the one Marcus Duffield focused his analysis on, shows the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Hall in what the archive calls the early framing stage. The hall's walls are visible for a height of approximately 30 feet above the workers in the foreground. No scaffolding is present on the exterior wall face. No formwork. No evidence of the wooden centering structures that would be required to build arched openings of that span from the ground up. The arches are simply there, finished, clean, and the ground around them is lower than the surrounding terrain by a measurable margin. Photograph 5 is the most technically specific of the 10. It shows a cross-section trench that had been dug along the eastern foundation line of the agricultural building. The trench is approximately 12 feet deep. What is visible in the wall of the trench, visible because of the angle of the winter light in the photograph, is a layer of material running horizontally at a depth of roughly 9 feet below the then current ground surface. A retired geological surveyor named Frederick Ansel Coombe, who examined a print of this photograph in 1973 and wrote about it in the Illinois Archaeological Survey's Irregular Bulletin, identified that horizontal layer as what he called a pre-disturbance grade line, meaning the original, undisturbed surface that existed before whatever event deposited the 9 feet of material above it. He estimated the deposition event at somewhere between 30 and 100 years prior to the photograph. The 1893 fair's architectural team is not on record as having encountered this layer. No soil report from the 1891-1893 construction period acknowledges it. Photograph 6 shows the fisheries building from the west, dated April 1892. A large timber structure is visible in the right foreground. Not scaffolding, but a system of braced timber frames being used to brace an existing wall from the outside while earth is being removed from its base. This is a technique used in excavation, specifically when uncovering a structure whose footing is being freed from surrounding deposit. It is not a technique used in new construction, where the wall would be self-supporting from its foundation upward. Photograph 7 shows an interior space identified in the archive as the unfinished nave of the Manufacturers Hall. Workers are visible on the floor below. The ceiling, coffered, decorated, with ornate plasterwork panels running the full length of the nave, is complete, fully finished. No scaffolding is present inside the structure. No work platforms. No evidence of the overhead rigging systems that would be required to construct and finish a ceiling of that complexity from the ground up. The workers on the floor appear to be cleaning the floor surface, not laying it, cleaning it. Photograph 8 is the most difficult to obtain in its original archival format. It exists in 3 known prints, one at the Chicago History Museum, one in a private collection in Evanston, and one that was part of a lot sold at a 1967 estate auction in Lake Forest, Illinois, to a buyer whose identity was not recorded in the auction house ledger. The photograph shows a section of the horticultural building's basement level. Workers have removed a section of floor, and what is visible beneath it is a lower floor, intact, tiled, and of a different material and pattern than the floor above. The archive caption reads, Sub-basement utility installation, horticultural building, winter 1892. The tile visible in the lower level is not a utility floor. It is a finished decorative floor. Two different finished floors, one beneath the other, at the horticultural building, which the official record says was constructed in 1892 on bare marshland. Photograph 9 was published once, in a Chicago Tribune supplement from August 1893, and has not been reproduced in any standard history of the fair. It shows the south entrance of the Woman's Building, designed by Sophia Hayden. Visible at the lower right of the frame, where the building's exterior wall meets the graded ground, is a section of exposed wall that extends below the established grade line. The exposed section has a different surface texture than the wall above the grade. It has also, visibly, a different color. The material below the grade line is a warm gray. The material above, the staff cladding that covered all the fair buildings, is white. What the photograph shows, at the junction of the ground and the wall, is not a new building meeting new earth. It is a new cladding material applied over an older surface that was already there, partially below grade. Photograph 10 was taken after the fair closed in the winter of 1894, during what the official record describes as the demolition phase. It shows a section of the machinery hall in a partially dismantled state. The staff cladding has been stripped from a segment of the western wall. What is beneath it is not the steel and timber frame that the official construction record describes. What is beneath it, visible in the original photographic print, is a masonry wall of a type, color, and coursing pattern that does not match any of the construction specifications filed with the Fair's Department of Works in 1891 or 1892. The official history of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition has never adequately addressed what these 10 photographs actually show. It has never explained why multiple site photographs show Earth being moved away from building bases rather than toward them. It has never explained why no interior photographs from the construction period show scaffolding or overhead rigging inside the major structures, despite ceiling heights of 60 to 90 feet, requiring precisely that equipment. It has never explained why the horticultural building's basement photography shows two distinct finished floors at different levels, when the building was constructed on fill. Why does photograph 10 show a masonry wall beneath the staff cladding that does not correspond to any surviving construction specification? Why was the one building that survived, the Palace of Fine Arts, found in the 1920s to have a substructure inconsistent with 1891 construction? Why did Daniel Burnham, in a private letter written in 1912 to his former collaborator Charles McKim and now held in the Art Institute of Chicago's archive, refer to the construction of the fair as the most necessary fiction of my professional life? Why would a man who had just delivered the most celebrated architectural project in American history, the crowning achievement of a distinguished career, choose the word fiction to describe it 14 years later in a private letter he had no reason to believe would survive him? Why do Burnham's construction diaries contain fewer than 40 pages covering the first 9 months of site work on a project he reportedly managed hour by hour? And why, in every major retrospective of the fair published before 1940, is there no single engineering analysis that attempts to reconcile the documented labor force with the documented timeline and the documented floor area of the completed buildings? The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty what these buildings were or where they came from. What we have is a photographic record that documents a process inconsistent with construction, a substructure inconsistent with its supposed age, an interior photographic record with absent scaffolding, a sub-basement with 2 finished floors, a wall beneath the cladding that no specification describes, and one private letter from the man in charge using a word, fiction, that no one who built something from nothing would choose. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The official record tells us that the 1893 White City was the greatest construction achievement in American history. Built from a swamp in 27 months by the genius of the Gilded Age. What these photographs, taken by the fair's own official photographers and held in the fair's own official archives, tell us is that something was already there. What it was, how long it had been there, and who built it are questions that the official history of the United States has consistently declined to ask. The answers may still be visible in archive drawers in Chicago, in the collection of an unnamed buyer at a 1967 Lake Forest auction, in the sealed sub-basement records of the Museum of Science and Industry, which still stands on the same ground, on the same substructure, resting on the same pre-disturbance grade line that the Palace of Fine Arts stood on in 1893. If you have made it this far, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to see it. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when no one looks. Next week, I am pulling the thread that connects the 1893 fairground photographs to a set of survey maps filed with the city of Chicago in 1889, 2 years before construction was supposed to begin. That show finished building footprints on the Jackson Park site. Specific dimensions, named structures, on land that the official record says was empty marsh. One map, one surveyor's name, and a filing date that the standard history of the fair has never once acknowledged.